Chapter 4. Label Group. Salda's family were state citizens, and this meant fighting to survive. In this struggle, Salda's role was now to join a new labeling mission. The task was simply to put the right label on a being suspected of being a robot, before neutralizing it. This was the sole duty of the labeling group, because labeling a human as a robot was a major crime against humanity. Once a correct label was put on a machine, anything in its body that could be dismantled and sold could be taken apart. Salda, with her long, curly hair falling over her green eyes, would excite the person she talked to with her enthusiasm, but despite this, she couldn't be said to be very talkative. She was 16 and had started coding at a young age, so her interaction with the world around her mostly took place within her brain. Life, when it brought new faces before her misty eyes, would suddenly make her excited and draw her out of her shell. In recent months, her successive correct decisions in each new labeling mission had drawn attention, and she had gained an unchanging role, watching the dangerous play acted out during the mission from the front row and the best angle. Labeling meant stepping into dangerous, foreign lands, approaching or distracting a robot that scrutinized everything around it meticulously. Was not an easy job. The first condition was to turn off the broken state implants, because an outdated or unstable electrical signal in an implant would immediately attract attention, and the robot would perceive it as a threat. Such a mistake would ruin the whole plan, but worse, it could expose the group by revealing the momentary neural maps. It would be easy for the robot to notice Salda, who was panicking among 50 people walking around, unaware of its presence. Judging a robot's true identity based on its appearance would be gambling. Their energy irregularities were perfectly hidden, making it impossible to distinguish them by body temperature from afar. They had thousands of hours of machine learning, they had practiced every scenario required by daily life, and the corresponding emotional expressions, countless times. They could assume any role required by the situation and display the necessary facial expressions. Yet, they still had flaws that couldn't be closed. Salda called it a stupidity inherent in their nature. It was believed that robots were increasingly infiltrating society. At first, ordinary people, living alone and working in inconspicuous jobs, started to disappear. These people had professions highly suitable for machine learning. The sole condition for a profession's suitability was its potential for meeting new people and experiencing different things. Robots didn't need to attend important conversations or learn secret information. They sought ordinary conditions that anyone, not being a programmer, could easily meet. Once a robot blended into life, it would perform its duties for years like a dormant cell, until Salda's group intervened. Despite having exposed 8 robots without making a mistake so far, Salda didn't know why she should be proud of this, but her star had already shone within her small community. It was evident that some group members made their living thanks to her. The small unit Salda was part of was an extraordinary group that reported to a larger group in Istanbul, mostly obedient to orders and tolerant of small teenage foolishness. The brain of the group, which looked like a random gathering of irregular people, was a young man named Sinur in his 20s. When Salda first saw him, she found his fearlessness and seemingly perfect answers unbelievable. Sinur looked like he had spent years not only preparing for the street fights, but for every thought behind this purpose. According to him, he was a former soldier, but in reality, he was just a former student who was allowed to study in a military school for 2.5 years until his father lost his corporate citizenship. He had extensive knowledge about state weapons, but like everyone else, he knew nothing about corporate weapons. The target in tonight's operation was an insignificant corporate representative they had been watching for a while, living with a close relative. After weeks of research, one morning Sinur appeared, saying, "It's time," while Salda held her leather-covered notebook where she recorded notes about the robots she labeled. She hadn't yet taken any notes about Mustafa Bey because they needed to get through the night of the operation to move to a new page. When Sinur said they had no more time to wait, Salda was reading the underlined sentence in her notebook. Robots also have moments of panic. They are just not good at noticing it. According to Salda's notes, Robots couldn't mimic the chaotic behaviors of humans experiencing strong emotional outbursts and the unexpected courage that appeared in moments of panic. This was their weak point. Once, she had observed a robot holding the hand of a relative who was bleeding out, trying to give them confidence. Then she had listened to another robot trying to find a few soothing words for its mother having a panic attack. These were extraordinary times when spontaneity peaked, and unexpected speeches and behaviors emerged. These flaws were a temporary inadequacy stage for robots, and once they did enough machine learning, they would be perfect against humans. There was no place for weapons or violence in their plan because no one in the group was fit for a military mission. All they had were rumors and weak assumptions about the strange behaviors of a being named Mustafa. It could be because the man had lost his entire family in a tragic accident, or it could be due to the prolonged adaptation period of a new implant. But the possibility of being a robot was the most unpleasant option that needed to be eliminated. Their only solution was to make the robot believe in the reality of the situation and emotions it witnessed. And trap it. The robot could not have an intuition about whether the emotion it diagnosed at that moment was real or not. Salda's role in the plan was merely to observe the events from a cautious distance. At a certain moment, all eyes would turn to her, and based on her judgment, it would be determined whether the being in front of her was human or not. When the label group's decision reached the organization's military wing, called Recyclers, no one wanted to see a heart still beating inside the ambushed body. The decision on whether there were countless electric motors and a network of advanced batteries under the skin had no room for error. The label group had made the right decision 8 times in a row, bringing peace to the streets shaken by purposeless murders and human slaughter stories. Salda was anxious before each operation, as the robot's overreaction could lead her to mislabel it and let it escape. They needed more intelligence, but apparently, the robot had not bothered to engage in dialogue with anyone with a non-operational implant. Salda still hoped that the robot would compromise in a crowded environment with complex social interactions, because adapting to the environment was part of its software to avoid detection in such situations. Robots care to be polite while hiding in society might be the last chance for humans. The time when this politeness would end might not be far off, and tonight's plan was based on the vulnerability coming from this politeness. According to the intelligence, the being named Mustafa Bey was an ordinary man in his 50s, overweight, with an unclear economic status and no striking features. He lived with his sister, who had moved in a few months ago. The plan was simple. They would make the robot believe that his sister was in danger. Their success depended on the woman's unintentional cooperation with them. Everything would happen before the robot's eyes, and at least, it was expected to assume a role that showed it cared about his sister. The inconspicuous danger scenario was the activation of the fire alarm in the building. During the ensuing chaos, a stimulant would be injected into the woman's arm outside the robot's view. When the fire alarm sounded, there was a great rush on the fire escape. The underground tower poured into the street in panic. The label group seized the opportunity on the last floor of the 8-story fire escape journey of Mustafa Bey and his sister, and they managed to inject a dose of stimulant into the woman's veins, causing severe convulsions. When they reached outside the building, the woman's movements had slowed down. The shrill and painful sound of the fire alarm filled Salda's mind, leaving no room for the slightest thought. The young girl was careful not to lose sight of Mustafa Bey while also ensuring she was not noticed. Suddenly, she felt a small gap in the alarm's scream, and realized she was looking into the sister's eyes, her heart beating to a different rhythm. The woman's eyes remained on her for the duration of a breath. Then she abruptly turned and grabbed Sinner by the wrist. Mustafa Bey was a shadow cast by the dim light of the night among the people and sounds. Against the increasingly rapid and perfect movements of his sister, he stood as a colorless and clumsy object, indifferent and aimless. At that moment, Salda saw Sinner collapse under his own weight. As the young man's scream shattered the shrill sound of the alarm, the woman fixed her large eyes on Salda. The young girl was paralyzed. She wanted to take a step and move away, but her feet seemed too far away to control. As people rushed towards Sinner lying motionless on the ground, The robot said something to Mustafa Bey and then turned back to Sauda. Then, time slowed down, and colors mixed into shadows like paints flowing off objects. The scream of the alarm was now a hum suspended in the air. Sauda saw with all clarity that she no longer needed to make a choice. The mission was complete. The robot had given the answer in her place. Sauda would not be responsible for anyone's death in vain, but the wrong information they had gathered had cost Sinner his life. As Sauda ran without looking back, the image of Sinner lying on the ground was in front of her eyes. She waited to hear Sinner's accusatory words. However, the young man was not accusing her, no matter how much Sauda wanted him to speak up. Sinner must have been dead, but a meaningless intuition was telling her that the sense of trust between them was still alive.